All right, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to do right now is some of you are having a little bit of difficulties with answering the essential questions for the social showcase, so I'm going to quickly just explain how I would go about answering these questions. Okay, so it's really important that you answer the questions clearly and carefully and use your research to help you with the answering these questions, because it's really fundamental that you answer them in order to, meet or exceed expectations for this assignment. So let's get into it a little bit. Okay, so question number one, the essential question number one looks at how does the culture of the day shape your individual? So what were the factors that contributed to your individual's kind of legacy? Okay, so question number one is looking at how does the culture of the Renaissance shape your individual? So you're going to be looking specifically at humanism and how humanism played a role in shaping the artwork, the thoughts, the actions of your individual. Okay, so that's going to be where your research comes in. So what I would do is I would ask myself these kind of questions. So I look at the individual and I would ask myself, what led him or her to become influential? So that's kind of one of the questions I would ask myself. Another question I would ask is, what type of education did the person receive? So what was the level of education of the individual? Were they highly educated? Did they go to, good schools? Did they apprentice under other individuals? Who did they learn from, and how did they get influenced by those people? And then I guess thirdly would be what shaped his or her thoughts. So were the individuals that influenced them instrumental in shaping the opinions of your individual? So, if you have an artist, who did they serve under? What type of artwork did they do? The Renaissance and humanism really was human-centric or human-focused. And so, if you serve under a person who's a humanist and they're creating all these works of art that are, anatomically correct and based on the human body, then obviously that's going to shape the artwork that you then produce. Okay, so these are questions I would ask myself. And so once you've asked these questions and you have some research, as all of you do at this point, you have lots of research, but answering the question really requires you to create and synthesize that information. And so how I would do this is, if I'm confused about how to best explain my answers, you just need to remember that you just have to P. Okay, so P is point, example, explanation. Okay, point, example, explanation. So if my point is, for instance, that let's say Leonardo da Vinci, humanism played a huge role in shaping Leonardo da Vinci's work, and an example would be the anatomy, the book of anatomy that Da Vinci was creating before he died, right? This clearly shows that, Da Vinci was concerned with the human body and learning about it, as humanists were, right? Because they're human-centric. So that would be an example of work that he was working on that showed that he was influenced by humanism. The explanation of that would be, that Da Vinci was constructing a book of anatomy on human beings because they wanted to understand them, as humanists did at that time, right? They wanted to focus on humanity and understanding the value of humanity, and understanding, how we're constructed. So that kind of is an example. So again, the point is that Da Vinci was indeed influenced by the Renaissance and humanism. The example would be the Book of Anatomy, and the explanation is that the Book of Anatomy represents a desire for Da Vinci to understand the human body. Okay, so that would be one such example of how I would construct one of my points. Again, to answer the essential question, you have to come up with multiple examples. It's not just like one example. Okay, so again, that's question number one. Question number two is looking at the individual and how they shape culture. Okay, so this is essential question two. So how does your individual influence history is essentially the question. And so these are some of the questions that you need to ask yourself. What was the legacy of your individual? What was left behind if you had to, construct a, a graph about, the things that he left behind? What would be on that? So who did he influence? What was the work that he left behind that then in turn influenced other individuals? Who were those individuals? Okay, so If you have asked these questions and you have the research, then you need to P again. And by P, I do mean give a point, give an example, and give an explanation. So please ensure that like all of your essential questions are really answered in this kind of format where you're giving a point, you're giving examples, and you're explaining. Time and time again, I say that you really need to provide examples and explain your answers. It's not just enough to make a point, but you need to like back it up. You need to substantiate it with evidence. Okay, so that's what you should be doing for your essential questions and answering them. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email, and I'll be able to get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, so there you go. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. Thanks.